Carter sat near the warmth of the flaming campfire, rubbing his hands together to work out the chill. It was cold, unusually cold for October. No one in the scout troop had brought along enough warm clothes. Carter huddled closer to the fire, wishing he were at home in bed. "Carter," the scoutmaster's voice barked out. "We need more wood for this fire tonight. It will be pitch dark soon. You better go out and gather some now. Bring back squaw wood, dead branches, anything you can find." Carter shivered and drew closer to the fire. Why did the scoutmaster always pick on him? Just because he was the newest member of the troop, he always had to do the jobs that no one else wanted. "Carter," the scoutmaster shouted again, "get going." Carter jumped up and started to walk away from the fire. Josh, the only friend he had in the troop, came over to him and pulled off his jacket. "Here, put this on," he told Carter. "And thanks for getting the wood." Carter smiled and slipped on the warm jacket. Then he headed off into the woods. He knew it was no good to look for branches anywhere near the campsite. Everyone had gathered those up when they set up camp in the late afternoon. Carter headed off down a trail that led from the campsite into a stand of thick fir trees. The trees grew close together, their narrow trunks shooting straight up toward the sky. Carter looked for dead branches on the ground, but the fir above him from the trees blotted out the little light that was left in the sky. He wandered from one side of the trail to the other, picking up an occasional stick. Then, suddenly, he turned around in all directions trying to find the trail. He couldn't see it, and he had no idea which way he had come from. Carter started to shiver harder than before, and he pulled Josh's coat tighter around his body. He looked up at the sky and saw that it had turned inky blue. The fir trees had lost their green color and were now black shadows against the twilight sky. Carter knew he had only a few minutes of twilight before the sun set completely. He threw down the few pieces of wood he had gathered and began to run through the trees. In the dim light, he thought he saw the trail he had followed away from the camp. He ran down it through the trees, his mind fighting off fear. The trail became wider. Then Carter remembered. The moon was brighter in the sky now, and its light lit the trail like a silver ribbon through the dark woods. Suddenly ahead of him, Carter saw the yellow glow of a campfire. A surge of relief shot through his body. He was going to be safe after all. Carter stopped running and let his breathing go back to normal as he walked towards the fire's yellow glow. But as he drew nearer, he saw that there was only one person around the fire, a figure whose back was turned to him. He suddenly realized it was all wrong. This wasn't his troop's campfire, and the figure before him was a complete stranger. Carter stopped in his tracks, only a few feet behind the man. He felt scared, but the fire was so warm and inviting. Carter walked forward a few more steps. "I'm lost," he finally blurted out. The figure in front of him slowly turned around. Carter fixed his eyes on the man's face. It was a strange-looking face with a long jaw and a wide mouth. Then the man opened his mouth, and Carter shrank back. The man's teeth were long and pointed. They were the longest teeth Carter had ever seen, and they were dripping blood. Carter heard his own scream echo through the woods. He stumbled backward as the man worked his long teeth up and down as though he were chewing something. Then Carter ran off into the woods, away from the trail into the thick trees. Carter heard heavy footsteps crash through the woods behind him. He ran until he couldn't breathe anymore. Then he fell onto the ground and hid beneath a fallen tree. The heavy footsteps came closer and closer. They were so close that Carter could hear the raspy breathing of the man. He shrank himself into a tight ball under the fallen tree and tried to forget the sight of those terrible long teeth. Finally, the heavy footsteps set off through the woods away from Carter's hiding place. He stood up and started to run in the opposite direction of the man's campfire. He ran and ran through the trees with no idea where he was going. Then, just when he thought he'd fall over with fatigue and freeze to death in the cold, dark night, he saw a small log cabin ahead of him. Yellow firelight glowed through its windows, beckoning Carter toward it. Sobbing with relief, Carter ran up to the cabin door and pounded on it with the little strength he had left. A minute later, the door creaked open. An old woman stood there, staring out at Carter. "Help me," Carter gasped, stumbling into the cabin. The old woman stepped aside to let him in. She took Carter's arm and led him to a chair by the fire. "I was lost in the woods," Carter told her, "and I saw the most horrible man. He had teeth like... The old woman leaned over Carter in the firelight. "Were they like this?" she said, and smiled. Carter looked up and saw her long, pointy teeth dripping with blood. Then, just before he started to scream, Carter heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming into the cabin, and the door slammed shut forever.